Don, so let's go back real quick to your hour by hour. I'm the hourly employee and I got 1,000 computers to provision. I'm happy, right? Because I've got job security. So in some of the install types that you've shown us, would you say that this gives you also that centralized administration over them versus a decentralized approach of, or are we not quite into the centralized approach yet?
So it sets us up for centralized management,
Gotcha,
right? Because
gotcha.
what's going to happen is I get those 1,000 Macs, right? And I deploy this image. And so at that very moment, all 1,000 of those Macs are identical. But then I turn them over to my users. And the users start messing with them. They start changing them. They start modifying them. Now they're not the same anymore.
Those darn users.
But I've already rolled the image out. I'm not going to roll it out again. If I roll out Net Restore again, it's going to format their hard drive. We'll see later. You can actually make it where it doesn't do that, where you don't format their hard drive. But you normally want that, right? So you format the hard drive, they lose their data. So this gives us consistency and centralized management as far as the deployment goes. But when it comes to managing them after the fact, that's where we're going to need things like Profile Manager that we're going to see later in the series, where we can create policies. Where we can force people, and I can say, hey, I want every Mac in this building to have an IT Pro TV wallpaper. And I can deploy it out, and if somebody changes it, the policy will change it right back again. Or it'll just stop them from changing it in the first place, right? You can do that with different settings. I can enforce password policies and screensaver settings and all that stuff, and that'll take effect for the life of that system. And now I've got true central management. So this sets us up. This is that first step on that journey to being centrally managed. But if I stop here, I'm not actually centrally managed yet.
Sure.
So. All right, so let's start with the simplest of these image types, and that is the disk image, right? So we're going to take a look at disk images and how they work. These are probably the ones that are the most common. A lot of you out there, if you work in a business environment, maybe you've done net install, net restore, net boot. Maybe you've done those before, but maybe you haven't. And if you haven't really worked in the business environment, then you've probably only dealt with DMGs, disk images, right? Very, very common files, all right? Anytime you go and download software, it's almost always a DMG file that you're downloading, and it's an image of a disk. And when you double click on it, it appears on your computer as a disk just sitting right there. So, for example, you know, here, let me just, I'll take my computer, and if I just go to my downloads folder, I'm sure I have downloaded a ton of DMG files. In fact, here, you can see I've got a ton. Now, these are all different files that I've downloaded, and so you'll see things that I've downloaded like Java for OS X, the Java runtime environment, Xquartz, Blackmagic converters, and so on. This is all various software that I've used, right? So like VirtualBox. VirtualBox is a virtualization software, and so I downloaded it, and they gave me a DMG file. Well, I'm going to copy that to my desktop. And so when I copy it over, it's just right there. It's a DMG file, nothing too fancy. And when I double click on that, what happens? Well, see how it says opening the DMG and it's verifying it. It's checking it to make sure it's not corrupt. And assuming it's fine, for just a brief moment there, it said mounting. It mounts it like a hard drive. And when it's done, I see this, right? I see VirtualBox. I see it's got a package in here that I can install, right? That's the actual application. And you know, they want me to double click on that, and then I can go to applications and find the application. It's very exciting. But what's going on behind the scenes is it shows up like a hard drive. So right there, I can see that I've got this VirtualBox hard drive sitting right there, right? That's that disk image. Somebody somewhere made this image, and when I double clicked on it, it knows the image file is right there, but it mounted it like a hard drive. And we can see that if we jump into our terminal and kind of browse into where our hard drives get mounted. So in our terminal, whenever you attach a hard drive, it gets mounted into the /volumes folder. And if I jump in there, see how I've got a folder called VirtualBox. Now, I don't have an actual hard drive called VirtualBox. I have a hard drive called Macintosh HD. I've got a hard drive called external SSD. Those I have. But VirtualBox, that's that DMG file that's now mounted as if it were a hard drive. And so I can browse into that, and there's the files that we saw a minute ago. You'll see the package, the PKG file sitting right there. So it's treating it like a hard drive. And if I go into the disk utility, so I'm just going to fire up the disk utility here, it'll show up in here as a hard drive also. So looking at my list of disks, right here under disk images, I can see an Apple UDIF read-only compressed bzip2 media, rolls right off the tongue, and then there's that VirtualBox hard drive, right? So this is the first example of a disk image. We've made an image of a disk somewhere. Somebody at Oracle, because Oracle made VirtualBox, somebody at Oracle sat down and made this file, right? And while we might not use this for deploying operating systems, we can use it for deploying software, and so you might need to make one of these yourself. more importantly, you might get questions on this on the exam, so I want to show you guys how to make these DMG files and how they work. All right. So let's say that we want to make our own. We want to distribute some kind of software using a DMG file. Well, we're actually going to use the disk utility to do it. So let me ditch some of these other windows that I've broken open here, and I'm just going to start right here in my disk utility. Let's say that I've got some software I want to distribute. Let me find some software here. Let's do, how about iBooks? Everybody likes iBooks, right? So I'm just going to take iBooks, and I want to distribute the iBooks software out to my users. So I'm going to create a DMG file that contains iBooks. So inside of the disk utility, what you can do is, well, you can do a few different things. If you go up to your images menu in the disk utility, see how you've got like scan image for restore? That lets you take an image that already exists and bring it into disk utility so you can then restore it somewhere else. But I'm not ready to restore, I'm trying to make something. And if you want to make something, you've got to go into your disk utility menu, or I'm sorry, under your file menu, there we go. And under file, you've got new image, and here's where we've got a few different options. And one option is to make a blank image. I can just make an empty DMG file, and then I can throw files into it later. That's one way to go about it. Or if everything that I want to package is in a folder, I can turn that folder into a DMG. So if I put all of my software elements together, I can then choose to make a DMG out of that, and it'll build it. Or I can make a DMG file from a hard drive. And so see how I've got this virtual box is showing up here? I can make a DMG based on that. So if I have a physical disk, like my external SSD. So here's my external SSD. And if I look at it, inside of that external SSD, I've got some data. What do I have in that thing? Let's find out. So if I take my external SSD, oh, I've got some installers, right? So I've got an El Capitan installer and a Yosemite installer. So this is actually about probably 10 gigs of data here. If I want to make an image of that, well, in the disk utility, I just need to highlight the external SSD first. So I'm going to highlight that. And then you can go up to File, New Image, Image from External SSD. And it will create a DMG file based on that hard drive. And you can do that for an entire computer if you want. On the desk next to me here, I've got a Mac Mini. And the Mac Mini has been booted up into target mode. And in target mode, it shows up as an external hard drive. That's what this, if you were wondering why I had two Macintosh HDs, right? See how I have one Macintosh HD that's internal. That's the SSD that's in my laptop. But then I've got this other Macintosh HD. That's this Mac Mini hooked up in target mode. So I see it as a hard drive. So if I want to make an image of that entire computer, I can do that, right? Now, I'll have some challenges if I want to do it. For example, the hard drive in my laptop is 500 megs in size, okay? The hard drive in that Mac Mini is a terabyte. It's bigger than my laptop. So if I try and do a straight up image of it, it's going to image the whole drive. It'll create a 1 terabyte file. It's too big for my computer. But DMGs do support compression. And when you compress them, they only take the amount of space that's used. And on this Mac, you'll see it's actually using very, very little of its space. So I'm going to make an image of that. I'm going to take that Macintosh hard drive. I'm going to go up here to File, New Image, and I'll create an image from the Macintosh HD. And when I choose that, it's going to ask me a few questions. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'll just call this my Mac Mini image. I'll save it right to my desktop. The format is read-only, but if I drop that down, I got a few different choices, and I'm going to choose compressed. I need it to be compressed because otherwise I don't have enough hard drive space for this thing. So I'm going to choose compressed, and I'll hit save. All right. What's going to happen now is it's going to start reading the hard drive from that Mac Mini. It's a terabyte in size, but there's only, I don't really know how much is in there. It says 13.88 gigabytes right down here is actually used. So it's about to read 13.88 gigs, and then it's going to write it. Now, I do need to be an administrator, so I have to kind of clear the credential hurdle here. And we'll do that, and then it's going to start writing that image. So it's going to churn along, and there it goes. See how it says reading whole disk? It's going to read that whole thing. It's a 1 terabyte drive. Most of it's empty, though, so this will happen pretty quick. If you've got data on your drive, though, this can take a long time. If I had a full terabyte of data on there, I might need to go take a lunch break, and come back for part 2 and finish this later. But since it's only a handful of data, about 13 gigs, and it's going to get compressed, it'll become even smaller, this should happen pretty quickly. Now, I'm using Thunderbolt, so that'll be kind of fast. But if you're using FireWire or USB or something like that, then it might be slower and it could take even longer.